Hey, everybody. This is the Conveyor Technical Architecture Forum call. We have a couple topics on the agenda. Todd, did anything else get added, or is it those two that we...
It's just those two, so
Okay.
it's Jason and Derek.
Okay, so I'll just introduce both of those topics. So the first one is Jason has been working with Pranav. There's been an effort within MTC in conjunction with Crane 2, which is MTC being actually Crane version 1. So between Crane version 1 and 2, we're looking at extracting some of the work that we've done around direct state transfer between two clusters into a shared location that we're calling CraneLib. So the advantage of this is we learned a lot through like prototyping with previous Ansible projects that we had used in some in production environments. So we kind of proved some ideas there. That made its way into Crane version 1, where we have an official sort of productized version of that known as DVM, or direct volume migration. Underneath the covers there, we've decided that actually the mechanism that we're using to make the state transfer using rsync is generically interesting. And so we're trying to extract that logic and that process into this shared library in a way that it's reusable across projects. So we're interested in employing it in Crane 2's CLI so that you can run a command to run a volume transfer. And then similarly, we're interested in potentially contributing that to the Scribe project, which has similar goals as well. So it makes sense to centralize some of the logic there and the stuff that we've learned behind that. And so Jason and Pranav have been working on actually doing that work. And so we published a blog. Jason's working on a blog that kind of describes how we approached the architecture of that. So we wanted to share that because it may be interesting to the audience to see kind of how we're pulling logic out and putting it into some libraries and organizing things with Go in order to make that reusable. And then secondly, we have Derek, who's going to share our enhancement process. So this is kind of a success story. I think we've talked about it on this call for this audience previously. Within Conveyor, we have something that we call enhancements, and there's a repo that lives underneath the Conveyor organization that holds all of these documents. But effectively what we're trying to do is kind of bring the enhancement or like design process out into the open in a way that it's contributable by really anybody who's interested in the process and in the features that are being proposed. So we found it to be really helpful. Not only is it helpful for the design to be able to be very inclusive and have anybody who's interested in contributing do so, but secondly, it's an incredible reference in the future so that when we kind of come back to this 6 months later, we're able to understand, well, what were we talking about and why did we make the decisions that we did? And so we're trying to tackle a particularly difficult problem in MTC right now around some APIs being deprecated, the CRD v1 beta 1 API. So Derek's been working really hard on a number of enhancements, and we've had a lot of people participating in those conversations. So it's been a really good example of that and how that's working for us. So we wanted to share that with the rest of the group in case other folks are interested in kind of employing a similar process and how that might work. So Jason, do you want to walk through the blog that you posted?
Sure. I'll share my screen, I guess. Thanks, Rick.
I guess we should also call attention to this engineering. We have an engineering blog. Jason, I'm getting a little feedback.
Sorry, can you, is it better now or is it still no good?
I think it's just like I'm hearing an echo.
All right, give me a minute and let me move.
I just wanted to mention that this is the engineering.conveyor.io blog. So it's like a blog or like knowledge base when we're doing stuff like this. And we think that it's an interesting piece of information to share or use as a reference for folks who are new to the project, et cetera. We're just kind of publishing some of our like interesting engineering endeavors and documenting those on the blog that Jason's showing right now. So it's a Netlify Hugo project, so anybody can go post if they feel like it might be interesting to the broader community. So it's intended for Conveyor as a whole, so it's not just MTC, anything that might be interesting to folks. This is it.
Is this any better?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, sorry, I had everything turned way up because my neighbor started mowing his lawn as soon as I hopped on the call, so that was nice. So anyway, this is the blog post that'll be going up. So basically, it starts with an introduction, basically explaining how when we first created CAM, we used Restic, which came with Valero. And as we worked through the process originally, we felt it filled our needs, but as time went on, we started having some issues. People wanted faster migrations. So the problem with Restic is you've got to send the data from the source cluster up to the object storage, and then bring it down from the object storage to the destination cluster, which effectively about doubles the time that it takes doing if you were to do a direct migration from one cluster to the other. So with a lot of people wanting as little downtime as possible, we wanted to provide another option like rsync. We also had a case where it became apparent Restic wasn't handling damaged data very well. It would freeze and stop transferring, whereas rsync was more graceful and managed to get data across at least what was not damaged. So being able to finish the migrations was nice, even if we had to leave out a fair bit of data due to the damage. And then finally, the other thing that we want to do going forward is enable the ability to go from Kubernetes to Openshift. Right now, we rely on routes, so we would like to, in the future, introduce the ability to go over load balancers, potentially node ports, and other options that will work on various clusters that are not necessarily Openshift. So to get to that, we started thinking about the problem and how we broke it down in DVM for rsync. Basically, what we ended up with was rsync to do the transfer, stunnel to wrap that so that the transfer was done securely, and then the route. So the way that we thought of this is we had like a program to do the transfer, a transport, stunnel to encrypt it, and then an endpoint, in this case routes, to get it across. So what we did is we created an interface for each in CraneLib, which is linked here. So we have the transport interface here, the transfer, the transport, and the endpoint interfaces. And basically what each of these is a contract saying, you have to create these functions that will allow you to retrieve this data for each instance of an endpoint transfer or transport that you create. So we then set off to create two implementations at each layer to prove that we could swap them in and out. We ended up with rsync and rclone for transfer, stunnel, and null, which sounds a little funny, but in case anything comes along that includes encryption, technically rclone could include its own encryption. So that's a case where we could rework it to work encrypting itself. And in that case, it would be kind of silly to have two layers of encryption when one should do. And then for endpoints, we did routes and load balancers. So what we did is we created a compatibility matrix that basically just shows, each of these works as expected. If you use rclone or rsync with a load balancer, but use the null transport, they're going to be insecure. However, if you use stunnel, it'll be functional and secure. So each of these has been tested across the board and they work. And what this leaves us open for is a very simple way to add additional options. So services and node ports and so forth aren't implemented yet, but when we find a need for them, we should be able to rapidly create them by basically just copying a few files, changing the necessary config maps and so forth, and deployments in the case of any that require pods to run, and we should be off and running, adding additional options as we need them. As we went along, of course, testing, one of the things we did is refine the interfaces. So when I first wrote this, I created getters and setters for everything. And I think when Pranav and Alay were testing, they soon realized we don't need the setters. So we got rid of them. All the data that needs to be set is set when it's created. It becomes immutable at that point, and it simplifies the amount of code that has to be written for each of these. So thanks, Alay, Sean, Pranav, for cleaning up all of that and making it even easier. And then going forward, next steps, Pranav has been working really hard, I think, at least possibly with Alay and Sean as well, getting CraneLid to parity with the current DVM code. So we can use it in 1.6.0. And in that way, Crane 1 and Crane 2 will both benefit from all of this. And we should be able to add additional options to both, without having to write code for both. It also proves the library is pretty reusable because we're using it in the Crane 2 CLI utility that we're writing at the same time that we're using it in the controller. And there are other projects we're eyeing to incorporate this so that we can further prove its reusability and get even more development support with these options and make sure it works really well for a wide swath of use cases. And anyway, that's about it. There's a bunch of links down at the bottom to the code, some simple stuff on interfaces if you're not familiar with them. And I don't know if anybody has any questions, but that's about all I have.
Thanks, Jason. We have a question from James. Would this be helpful for Move to Cube?
I can't answer that personally. I don't know if the other folks working on Move to Cube.
Or Myth, or I'm wondering if there's any use cases like moving from Docker Swarm with persistent data, if this would be helpful.
James, specifically this functionality, probably not, because we are not transferring any data. Everything is like local processing and using that to generate it. So this functionality is probably not going to be reusable.
Got it. Thanks. Yeah, just wondering.
Absolutely. And Jason, one question I had was, what's the impact of moving this to a library to the versioning of Crane? I would assume like Go has some strict versioning with respect to semantic versioning, and especially when you go past V1 about breaking interfaces and stuff. Do you see some implications? For example, in MotoCube, we had that, and that's why we stay with minor versions as our major versions, similar to what Kubernetes is almost doing, right? Like we use 0.3 dot something for MotoCube 3.
I'm actually not aware of any. I don't know if Sean's around, if he has any idea, or Eric, I don't know.
I think there was another meeting that got scheduled during this time, so a few people are not attending that otherwise would, like John and Sean. Is Pranav on the call? Maybe Pranav has some thoughts on that.
Yes, yeah. I missed the question. Can you repeat that?
Yeah, the question was around the versioning scheme used by Go and its implications here. For example, as far as I understand, in Go, it uses strict semantic versioning, and so if you're using something like 1 dot plus, between the minor versions, it needs to be interface stable. Otherwise, there are some issues and stuff crop up.
Oh, I see what you mean. Is this about the Kubernetes dependencies, or it's just in general the interfaces exposed by the library?
I think it's more to do with Go rather than anything to do with Kubernetes, and that is why what I generally find is in most Kubernetes based projects, or not Kubernetes, not in most Go based projects, you might find the major versions are moved to minor, like you will say 0.18 for like 18 Kubernetes 18.
Oh, see, no, I don't think we have thought about that yet. We are on I think, a 0th version of the library.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think, maybe Sean has, but
Yeah, I think it's definitely something good for us to look at. I wasn't aware of that, so
right.
I have to definitely consider it and appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah, I think like Go as a language also doesn't take any. The language spec doesn't expect, and in fact, I don't even think that it concerns itself with dependencies because of the way that Go was developed. It came out of Google. They had a mono repo where like initial versions of Go actually just expected you to be pulling from master. So and Go, as anyone who's worked with me knows, I have a lot of problems with dependency management in Go, but it's come a long way, I think, and it's currently using Go mod, which is an improvement over Glide or any of the other dependency mechanisms. So that's actually part of the reason why there are so many different managers, is because Go as a language doesn't take a strong opinion on how dependencies are managed. There have been various implementations of how to deal with that because it's a problem that real people have to deal with. So Glide was one that was prior to Go as a language. I think it started to adopt Go mod as the official mechanism. So Go mod, which I linked, seems to expect semver of some kind. So it's good to keep in mind as we extract our logic out from DVM, which didn't have any real concept of versioning because it wasn't really ever designed to be consumed as a library, which CraneLib is. So we'll have to take into account the versioning of CraneLib to make sure that those interfaces remain like API compatible.
Right.
Sure. And also there were a few other things that along the way for MotoQ we learned, like for example, the usage of the internal one and the CMD and stuff. So there are some learnings we have in CraneLab or anything we can reuse. Similarly, even from MotoQ we had some learnings, so we can also talk about it sometime.
Great. Any other questions on that topic? Okay. So as I mentioned, next up is Derek, who's going to be just sharing our experience using this enhancement process, and that may be of other folks, of interest to other folks who are trying to tackle some equally complex problems and trying to solve those in an open manner.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, so some of you may have realized that we have this conveyor/enhancements repo. This is a place that we're using to follow a process similar to what Kubernetes and Openshift follow for their enhancements. You can kind of, if you're not familiar with an enhancement, you can kind of think of it like a design doc, a rally point for discussion and debate on a software design that you can sort of go into detail about everything about the design and also potential problems, risks and mitigations, and have a rallying point for everyone on your team and perhaps in the larger community to be able to both have a say in the design and also have a record of the decisions that were made. So just to show where this sort of came from, here we're looking at conveyor enhancements, but it's similar, like I said, to the Kubernetes enhancement process. They're called KEPs, and Openshift also has an enhancement process. I don't know if they have a particular name like a KEP, but we got our inspiration from there. And recently we've been doing some work planning out how the Crane project, also known as MTC, will be able to handle the upcoming removal of the V1 Beta 1 CRD from Openshift 4.9. And to accomplish this, we've actually gone through a couple revisions of enhancements. So we have multiple open PRs right now that are potentially going to be merged and provide that record of our design discussions. So I just wanted to quickly give an overview of what, if anyone here in the community is interested in contributing to this enhancements repository, you can see that we have it divvied up by the project. So right now we have two directories here for Crane related enhancements. I know there's an open PR for some of the vert migration forklift enhancements, and we're hoping to get broader usage of this repo as a sort of community point for these discussions. sorry, let's jump back here. So jumping into what is an enhancement, like should you submit an enhancement for something? The guide given here is your thing might be an enhancement if it has an impact on how conveyor projects are operated, including addition or removal of significant capabilities, if it needs significant effort to complete, if it requires consensus and code across multiple domains and repos. This is especially important, I think, making sure that you have consensus before you start just hacking away and writing code, and especially if it requires that formal documentation to utilize. And then it actually goes into more detail on what is not an enhancement. So some things are sort of too small in scope or just not an enhancement according to the qualifications listed here. So like bug fixes, additional testing, refactoring, and just like small impact changes generally are not going to be an enhancement. There's some guidelines here on when you might want to create an enhancement. Maybe if you've circulated your idea a bit already, or have done a prototype optionally, or in our case, we actually use enhancements on the Crane project as sort of a kickoff point when there's some new block of work to be done and we kind of vaguely have an idea of what needs to be done, but a lot of the finer details still need to be hashed out. That's when we really tend to utilize this process. So let's say you decide you want to write an enhancement. What you would want to do is head to this guidelines directory, and there's this enhancement template here. There's a few more details about how to use this in this README, but let's take a look at the enhancement template. So this is sort of a markdown enhancement template. And to properly fill this out, you would set all these metadata fields up here. And there's instructions in here. It's pretty self-explanatory if you just read this enhancement template. But the key ideas are fill out every section in the enhancement. Even if you don't have a lot to say in each category, you'll probably want to include something. There are certain categories in the enhancement that are set as optional, so you can actually remove these if you don't want, if they're not relevant to the enhancement that you're implementing. But the idea is to actually keep a fairly consistent structure to the enhancement, so that you can be judging each new implementation, each new idea on a similar set of standards, and have a similar set of record keeping for knowing about the decisions that have been made in the past. This is especially this is useful both to people on the team who may not have been directly involved in the decision-making process, and maybe they need to go back and reference it for later work. But also imagine if you have new people joining your team that need to be able to catch up on some decisions that were made. One of the things that sometimes happens, I think, in software projects is new people may come on and not understand some decisions that were made in the past, seem ridiculous without context, and hopefully this can help alleviate some of that pain, just trying to get everyone on the same page. So like I said, you fill out each section that's marked as non-optional, and you can fill out the optional sections as well if you deem them to be relevant. And then you submit a PR to the repo with your proposed enhancement. So we can take a look specifically, like I said, we were finding success in using this for this CRD v1 beta 1 removal, because it's provided a great point where the whole team can chime in, since this is actually a pretty wide-ranging change that affects a lot of affects developers, affects QE, and stakeholders also need to have something to say on this topic, because it affects compatibility with different clusters that we can run migrations between. So you can see here I've marked this as an alternative to 39. So sometimes you may have multiple candidate enhancements for a particular implementation that needs to happen. And when we look at the files changed, you can see sort of where we've filled out all the things that I just mentioned in this template. And you can see folks are commenting here. We're incorporating people's ideas and changes. People are able to catch shortcomings in the design that perhaps whoever is doing the initial draft missed. And I think it really just provides a valuable way for everyone on the team to be able to contribute to get to that point where you have a pretty good plan before you start developing, and there's less surprises, hopefully, with what comes out if someone just goes heads down and starts building before you have agreement on what the proper thing to build is. And just as an example here, I guess one more thing I'll mention, in this case where we have two enhancements for the same sort of thing we need to implement, we actually plan to merge both of them. And in the one that is selected as the preferred enhancement, we're just going to mark that as the implementable enhancement. So each time you get an enhancement to a different state, such as provisional, implementable, deferred, replaced, you merge it at each status change. And that way you're able to have sort of a current record of where that enhancement is at. In this case, one of these enhancements will be merged as replaced and the other one will be merged as implementable. Once we actually do the implementation, we may need to come back and make a few small tweaks if we ended up coming into some unexpected roadblocks, or just the design needed to change a little bit along the way. So I think that's the gist of it. We are using this process and we have been using it for a little over a year now in Crane. And I think recently we've started to pick up more steam in terms of just regularly filing these and getting the whole team to look at them whenever we can. And I just wanted to mention any projects that are not using this right now, definitely feel free. Like I said, forklift, Merrick submitted the first forklift enhancement, is currently in a PR, but you'll see it show up here soon. And definitely feel free to use this repo, and just, you can ping your teammates for review. I think it's cool though to have this public record of the design decisions that we've made with all of our software projects in Conveyor. So that's about it. Any questions?
Derek, this is a good process, and I think it's good to follow the Kubernetes. One question I generally have on this is, how does this when do we use issues for tracking enhancement versus using an enhancements repo? Like I understand the difference between a bug fix and a issue, but I was just wondering between an issue and an enhancement repo.
Yeah, right. So I guess you're wondering, when would you file something as an issue in the particular repository for a software, a software component, versus when would you do an enhancement? And I think the enhancement is useful, especially when it's something that spans potentially multiple of the repos that you may have, or if it's just a large enough change that it needs significant design consideration. At least in our case with Crane, we've been using one-off issues for like smaller subtasks, things that are more bite-sized and are pretty straightforward. But I think when it's like a larger decision and you think you want to have a record of it for in a place where you get to discuss it on a lot of different ways with all those categories of things that you would write about in the enhancement, that's when we use enhancements, just when we want to keep more of a record and have more of a team discussion of what should be implemented and make sure we're catching any shortcomings ahead of time.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions about enhancements? Well, thank you everyone for listening to that. Definitely, like I said, don't be afraid to submit an enhancement there, and we'd love to see more projects with contributions in this repo. One of the cool things about this too is just, I think I already mentioned this, but the fact that anyone who's arriving to right now, I think we're still in the process of building out this community, and anyone who's arriving to the community, then being able to see out in public the decisions that are being made, just makes it a lot easier, I think, for people to get on board with the vision of where each project is going and things like that. So
thank you, Derek. I think that's everything in our agenda. So unless there's anything else to discuss, I think that concludes the meeting.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.